want to welcome everybody to the Thursday Pivot. My name is Lori Power and I'm a group benefits specialist. Benefits are my only business. We are building strategic benefit programs for our clients, and part of our mandate is to be consistently responsive to our clients. And the one thing that we've learned during this pivot is to provide real information that business owners need to successfully maneuver in these stormy waters. So each week we do a show where we're going to talk about SHifT, and I bring in the experts to talk to you and provide you with the information firsthand that you need to succeed. The methodology is that all boats will float on a good tide. Patty, you like that one. So I'm very, very happy to welcome this week Patti Macdonald and Tara Hamelin from Bishop Mackenzie. They have two firms here in Alberta, one in Edmonton and one in Calgary, but they also have a global reach. I want to start first with you, Patti, as the managing partner and commercial and real estate lawyer for Bishop Mackenzie. There's no question, anybody who knows you more than a minute knows you're not only just a leader in your firm, but you're a leader within the community. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to practice in real estate law?
So I made a very conscious decision to become a lawyer. I wasn't an accidental lawyer. I'd been working out in the field in some paper pushing type roles, and I thought there might be a better way to make a better living. But what I really enjoy about the real estate practice is the quick timelines, quick turnarounds, and also the direct engagement with people. In Alberta, most real estate transactions still require ink signatures. So I get to meet with people face to face and really engage with them and get an understanding of who they are. And I think that's a great way to build a practice, and it's a great way to show people that not all lawyers are snakes and rats. And I take that as part of my role in the legal community.
Thank you for that, Patti. That's right. You're not all snakes and rats. Recently did a thought to say, you know, why are doctors put on the pedestal and lawyers put beneath the rock, right? It happens.
Well, we do dedicate ourselves to getting around rules. So, you know.
I would wonder that on a lot of professions, actually. Tara, employment law. It's always been a must-have or must-know, a person like yourself, for any business owner. I mean, between OH&S, the employment standards, human rights, employment law is always a hot topic, but especially during pandemic 2020. As a litigator and a partner with Bishop Mackenzie, can you tell us a little bit about why you decided first to go into employment law?
Well, like Patti, I think I can say I am not an accidental lawyer, but I think I can safely say I'm an accidental employment law lawyer. Early on in my career, somebody dropped an employment standards complaint on my desk and said, well, no one else here knows how to do it, you figure it out. You handle one of those files and suddenly you're the instant expert on the subject area. So that's how my practice in employment law started, actually. But it's interesting over the years how fascinating I found the area. I love the people issues in how they interact with the law, and the fact that it is such a huge business concern. I mean, your employees can be one of your biggest assets as a business. They can also be your biggest potential liability. And over the years, I've litigated a number of matters, but I think I've also helped a lot of businesses proactively avoid those kinds of lawsuits, those kinds of complaints, those kinds of audits, those kinds of things. That's where I get the most satisfaction out of my practice.
And rightly so, because, you know, nobody wants to be on the other end of that litigation. You know, it's always good to be ahead, know that you have your policies, procedures, guidelines, everything in play so that you can mitigate that particular risk. As somebody in insurance, I can tell you It's all about risk mitigation. So we may seem today like we're seesawing between two entirely different facets, but really the reason why I wanted Patti and Tara in the room is because at the end of the day, we're talking about the person. So we're talking about the employee who may be purchasing a home. We're talking about the business owner who is mitigating those risks and maybe looking at commercial property investment. So although it may seem at first glance like a seesaw, and it is, we're going to cover off that broad spectrum as we move forward. Patti, I'm going to turn it over to you for my next segment and ask, it's an incredible housing market right now. It actually has just taken me by surprise as a layperson looking at homes that I know have been on the market for a long time, or those sporadic properties that have been on year after year after year, and all of a sudden they're selling and they've got multiple offers. Tell us a little bit about that housing market right now from your perspective.
Well, it is catching everyone by surprise. The realtors and mortgage brokers that I deal with are all commenting that they didn't see this coming. But it's a little bit sensible because people who are wanting to get out of a vacation property, for example, or they want to downsize or right size, are looking to sell. And there are people who have more resources or who are redirecting their resources. And in that sense, I would think of, people who might take some expensive overseas vacations, deciding that now's the time to buy a lake property. I've probably done 4 lake property deals in the last month, which I have never done in my 17-year career. So there is a lot of movement. One of the things that's also driving that is interest rates. But here's the secret. CMHC deals, which many of us would think of as, the first time home buyer needs a CMHC insured mortgage. Those deals are at bargain prices right now. CMHC mortgages, I just signed one up for a sophisticated client who was downsizing, sold $1 million+ home, and the home they're buying, they got a CMHC insured mortgage at 2% interest. I mean, I've never seen that before. So CMHC insured mortgages, I mean, you have to do your cash flow projections and all of that to make sure that's worthwhile. But in this particular case, the clients are freeing up additional cash out of their home to invest in the markets. It's a good time to invest, some planners will tell you. And if they even make 5%, they're going to be turning that 2% that they borrowed into 3% uptick for them, as opposed to just having paid down more on their home, where it's not necessarily going to appreciate in value. So there's lots of movement: vacation properties, private deals, CMHC insured refinances, or new purchases. Yeah, there's a lot of movement. It's exciting. It's fun.
It is exciting, and it's exciting to watch. What's the one thing that people should keep in mind, or a common pitfall that you see happen more often than not as people get excited about these multiple offers and then they get deadlock on a property? What's your advice there on what they should be aware of, especially if they're going into an investment and looking to expand their portfolio?
Well, so one thing that I think COVID has taught all of us is to look at cash flow. And I can't stress enough, especially for people doing investment real estate, but also for principal residence purchases. You have to understand the business case for the purchase. I'm not confident that principal residences will always be tax-free. And so you need to do that financial analysis and make sure you're in the right space. And typically the thing that catches us in the real estate market and makes it exciting for me, but a little more stressful for clients, is timing. And realtors love to make the sale quick and get it over with before people lose that passion. But a short timeline in these days is sometimes complicated to accommodate when we need those ink signatures and that sort of thing. So timing is always a bit of a problem, but the cash flow projection and the financial analysis, I think, is more important now than ever.
I want to remind everybody in the room, especially for our newcomers, to put your contact information up in the chat bar. Additionally, this is your time with lawyers who know. So also add your questions to the chat bar. I'll be watching it and I'll make sure to answer those, get those questions out there to both Patti and Tara. And just before I turn to Tara, I do have one more question for you, Patti, with regards to this hot market. I'm also seeing people trying to do a deal themselves outside of the realtor, outside of people who are professionals in that marketplace. And sometimes they're picking up, you know, the little legal kit that goes along with that.
Right.
What are some like that to me is just an open wound of a liability. What are your thoughts there?
So I am seeing lots of private deals. Again, I've done probably 3 private deals in the last month. Now, doing a private deal with a lawyer it's not the same as doing it with a realtor, because we don't care about whether the kitchen is worth what you think it is and all those kinds of pieces. But you do have some level of protection in terms of the contract and how that closing happens. I think there's a lot of movement that's what we call non-arm's length. So somebody buying the neighbor's house, you know, the family members buying a house out of an estate before the estate has been fully probated, or trying to enter into agreement about that. These sorts of just realigning people's assets so that they can get through the downturn. Of course, I would recommend that people have a lawyer. They're going to need a lawyer in order to deal with land titles right now. You can't walk in and do a deal with land titles. No mortgage company will deal directly with individuals. So you're going to need a lawyer, and it's a good thing to find someone who's going to help you through that process and pick off some of those issues. Over these deals that I've been doing that are private, 2 of them, incidentally, the people who were purporting to sell the property didn't own it. So this was really interesting because, you know, one of the first things we do is pull a title to see who's the owner. So in one case, the previous transaction, which was also a related party transaction, had never been finalized. It was a cash purchase. In the other case, it was, you know, the parents held the title, but the kids were the real owners. So we just had to sort of massage those details to make them happen. So it wasn't a travesty in either case, but these are the things that you need to get right, or your deal's not going to close.
And often overlooked by somebody who's not doing it at the moment. I mean, imagine from the buyer's perspective. Tara, coming over to you, because I mean, it's employees who buy houses. So there's my segue. I did it. It seems from an outside perspective that, you know, OH&S, employment standards, they're changing daily to me. It seems like, you know, a merry-go-round of change. How can employers actually navigate these waters? I mean, as an employer, it just seems like I don't even know where to start, because these changes are just ongoing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we've all had to start dealing with largely as a result of the pandemic, but these changes are happening much more frequently now than the beginning years of my career. For example, I'm just seeing constant amendments to regulations and case law coming out these days. The problem, of course, with the pandemic is that everything is happening so quickly that it's, by the time the employer or the company has implemented one set of changes, it's already changed all over again. I mean, we're trying to keep employers updated on some of the bigger changes in employment law and in with respect to the pandemic and treatment of employees, layoffs, constructive dismissal, that kind of thing. And we just get one of the updates out and something changes, and we have to send out a further update. So I can understand how challenging it is for a business owner to keep up the pace with this. When you're dealing with employees, there's so much potential liability lurking in this area that we as practitioners are still sitting back and going, we honestly don't know where this is going in future. And unfortunately, we're not going to know until the courts deal with some of these issues a year, 18 months, 2 years from now. When a lot of these cases start coming before the courts, we're not going to have a clear idea. So a lot of us are just sort of working our way forward as best we can with the knowledge that we've got. You know, in terms of an employer keeping abreast of the latest changes, I think that the governments have actually done a fairly good job at updating their websites, at making press releases and announcing these different changes. So I always strongly recommend to my clients, make sure that you're on there, make sure that you know the latest announcements that are coming down the pipe. I mean, we're doing our best to keep you updated, but there might be specific things related to your company that we're not aware of, that we might not take into consideration, that might be critical to you. So try to keep abreast with at least employment standards, with occupational health and safety and their requirements for working in the workplace, at, people coming back after COVID shutdowns. Know what federal government programs are in effect as well, to know what you can access, what benefits your employees can access. What are the changes to temporary layoff periods, for example? When do I have to start bringing employees back? What are my options if I can't bring them back? And then at the end of the day, if you really need advice and guidance, it's a very self-serving statement, but it's well worth a call to someone like us, because within 10 minutes, we can hopefully steer you away from making a mistake that could be incredibly costly to you and your company.
Well, and I know that firsthand, because it's a phone call, and then that weight is lifted off the shoulders. Tim, I'm going to get to your question in just a moment, but I can say from a benefit perspective, Tara, you and I've talked about this a lot, but sometimes, these regulations work in silos. Patti, you probably find this as well, with changes to CMHC, and then nobody discusses it with anybody who it really matters to. And this is what I'm talking about within employers and in benefit plans, the extension of the temporary layoff. What does that look like for benefit plans? Nobody asked the insurance carriers whether they're going to keep it going, so that like everything is reactive after the point. I see an enormous risk of employers moving from that temporary layoff to that more permanent. They don't really want to bring that employee back now, and they haven't deemed it to be a permanent layoff, but eventually it's going to be. Now we're going to be dealing with, is it constructive dismissal? Is severance applicable there? Should they just be, biting the bullet, so to speak, and get that severance out of the way if that is their intention? And what's the best course of action in that case?
Well, the problem of temporary layoffs right now is they're manifest problems with temporary layoffs. The issue overall is that under different provinces' employment standards legislation, whether you're in BC, Alberta, Ontario, or even whether you're a federally regulated company that falls under the Canada Labour Code instead, there are certain defined periods during which you can temporarily suspend an employee's employment. But if you go beyond that period of time, it's now a deemed termination. So under the employment standards legislation, once that happens, you are obligated in most cases to pay employees termination pay, and if you're in a province like Ontario, severance pay on top of that as well. And benefits and a benefit extension if you're in Ontario. It's a completely wacky regime in my view, but that's what you're required to do under those particular pieces of employment standards legislation. Now, every province to date has implemented measures to extend temporary layoff periods. For example, under the Alberta Employment Standards Code, it's only 60 days, but currently the government has extended it out to 180 days. And we might see a further extension depending on how the economy goes. We don't know, because they wait until virtually the 11th hour and then make an announcement about the extension. The issue with this so far is that employers have been pretty much insulated from any backlash on this because of these extensions, that the periods of layoff are being permitted by employment standards. The problem is, and something that not a lot of employers know, is that just because employment standards legislation says that you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that the courts are going to agree with that if somebody sues you. Under the common law, and any court would see a constructive dismissal at an allegation arising from a temporary layoff, unless you have a policy or a contract that says to your employees, we may have to lay you off, during periods of reduced business and reduced income. The courts view temporary layoffs as constructive dismissals, and that entitles employees to sue for essentially wrongful dismissal damages. So the ironic part about all this is that you're temporarily laying people off so that you don't have to terminate their employment, but by doing that, you actually get to that effect anyways. It's kind of an ironic situation. Now, what a lot of us who practice employment law are waiting to see is, are the courts going to view layoffs in the period of the pandemic and as a result of the unprecedented financial challenges that this has imposed on businesses, are the courts still going to view layoffs during this period as constructive dismissals? We don't know. That's one of the big unknown questions that we have moving forward with this. Right now, as we know the law as it is applied right now, they would be considered constructive dismissals. We don't know how that's going to be looked at down the road. So the layoffs are definitely something that are going to be a challenge to deal with in future, but unfortunately, most businesses have had to implement them just to survive for the here and now.
Well, it's going to keep you busy, Tara, I'm sure, for a long time.
This is going to generate so much case law.
Oh, I can see it, and it's exciting from your point of view, but I wouldn't want to be the employer on the other end of building that case law. Tim, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, it's kind of long. So I was actually recently had a conversation with an employee of a large multinational, and he was telling me about their DC pension plan and how there were some of his, I guess, peers who had transferred their retirement accounts out of the group held plan and into a brokerage account. And because in doing that, as punishment, the employer then withheld their matching contributions for a year time period. So it was extremely odd to me because I don't really understand why the employer would do that. And secondly, like, is there any real course of action here for the employees to kind of fall back on?
Well, I'll just jump in on that one. Essentially, this kind of aligns with what I was just talking about with respect to constructive dismissals. Anytime that an employer makes a fundamental unilateral change to the terms and conditions of an employee's employment, they run the risk of an allegation of constructive dismissal arising. Now, whether or not providing matching RRSP benefits would be seen by the court as a fundamental portion of the employee's employment agreement is an open question. But essentially, if this is a benefit that the employer had been providing consistently and then withdrew it with no warning or no ability to do so under their particular policies, and I think they run a significant risk that someone is going to raise this as a potential constructive dismissal issue.
This leads to one of my questions I had for Patti with regards to, so thank you for that segue, Tim, is somebody may be taking that money out to then utilize it for purchasing homes. And I have heard rumors that, people are utilizing the government funding as part of their down payment into planning for their next home purchase, or that residential property that they want as a recreation property. What are your thoughts on that, Patti?
Well, I mean, I think any of the government programs that are available right now, people need to make sure that they are actually meeting the eligibility criteria, and need to be aware that there are rat lines available for other people to tip off the government about misuse. I was looking at this the other day, and there are literally thousands of improper claims on various government pots of money that have been identified, and where people are required to to repay those funds. The penalties are very severe. I mean, I believe it's the CERB that has a 200% penalty if you improperly collect the CERB. So if you're not eligible for it and you collect it, you have to repay it twice. So you know, that's not worth it, and especially if you're wrongfully collecting money to increase your own financial position. The money is there for the government to come and take in an audit, and the penalties are severe. And I don't do litigation, but I know this about tax. The penalties are not necessarily going to kill you, but the penalties and interest together from CRA can easily double, triple, quadruple the amount of the underlying payment that you wrongfully took or failed to make in many cases as well. So I think people need to be very careful and make sure that they are eligible for the things they are applying for. And if you are rehired after a layoff sooner than you thought, and you want to go back and reassess that and consider whether you can pay it back, then I think people should think about doing that, because the audit risk is extremely unpleasant.
I think we're going to have a lot of employment opportunity with CRA for those auditing risks. Talisha, can you unmute and ask your question?
Sure, if I can figure out how to do that. Basically, I assume that my question is a little bit deeper than just sort of the overarching question, but you know, as companies start to struggle and they start to sort of take closer looks at their financials and those sorts of things, what are some of the legalities around reducing everyone's pay, or reducing only a few people's pay, or you know, reducing work hours, which results in reduced pay? Sort of as soon as you start playing with anybody's hours or money, you know, how does that work?
Well, I'll jump in and tackle that one. I guess we'll discuss this on the basis of only Alberta employees. I will say, if anyone has Ontario employees, the government has implemented a change to their regulations. So then now that a reduction in hours, a reduction in pay, even to the point of permanently laying somebody off, is basically not considered a constructive dismissal anymore, for as long as this particular change stays in operation. But for Alberta, we still have a situation where, again, unilaterally altering the terms of somebody's employment, even for very valid financial reasons, you know, the survival of the company perhaps, would potentially still be construed as a constructive dismissal by the court if somebody wants to sue on that basis. As I said, this is one of those things we're probably not going to know until a year or a year and a half down the road to see how the courts view it. Are the courts going to take a different view because of the severe financial repercussions of the pandemic and the havoc that it's caused on business? Are they going to take more of a pro-business stance than a pro-employee stance? It's possible. They haven't done so historically, but you know, there's always hope. When you're looking at reducing employees' hours and salaries and benefits and things like that, just to stay afloat financially, my recommendation to people has been throughout, you need to get the employees on side with this, because in my view, many employees would prefer a short-term reduction in their salaries, in their hours, over the benefits they could get off of EI potentially, or losing their job completely. If you get the employees' consent and they consent to those changes, then it's not a constructive dismissal. Make sure you get any consent though in writing and make sure that it's properly papered, that this is anticipated to be temporary only. And if you can't get the employees to buy in, the best you can do at that point is to provide them with some notice of the change. And, you know, if at the end of the day, the court finds that there was a constructive dismissal and they're entitled to more notice of the change, at least you've given them that much. You've at least provided yourself with that much of a cushion. But my strong recommendation to people these days is work with the employees, get them on side, and then figure out what your options are going to be after that point. As I said, I've been quite surprised actually at how receptive most employees have been to these kinds of changes. But one of the things that I wanted to emphasize later on, and this is a good segue for it, is that now is a great time to start reassessing your contracts and your policies to make sure that in future, when this stuff happens again, because it will, it may not be a pandemic, it might be a flood, it might be a fire, it might just be some other unknown act that disrupts your business, you need to have as much flexibility as possible to implement these changes. So it's possible that your policies and contracts already do. You need to look at them and see what kind of flexibility you have built into it. And if they don't, you need to reassess whether this is a good time to start making those changes.
You need somebody on side who's going to constantly monitor those changes as they happen and be your advocate. So the 30 minutes goes by so fast every week. I'm amazed at how fast 30 minutes can go when you're not waiting in a doctor's office, right? Last remarks, you know, we do hear, especially like there's a hot housing market, the employers are under risk. I wonder down the road, what are your last thoughts if we're here this time next year? Okay, we are going to be here next year. Sorry, that came out totally wrong. So we're here this time next year. What do you see, just closing remarks, what do you see in the housing market, Patti? Do you see that there will be foreclosures or there will be more glut into the marketplace of people trying to sell? And Tara, what do you see from an employer's perspective on how they would have realigned their business to protect themselves with regards to these constant changes? Like you said, it's going to happen. They need to be prepared. So I'll turn it over to you first, Patti.
So I think that the biggest change that's going to occur, and it will take a couple of years, is going to be the old real estate adage of location, location, location. That is going to change. The idea of these castles in the sky downtown, on the commercial side, that's already changing. The idea of where people are going to decide they want to settle and long-term work from home. The suburbs may end up with a completely different design and boom, and this is going to happen worldwide, right? So I think that the location that people choose to live and work is what is going to change the most. And I think that that is going to be driven by, you know, individual circumstances, and it's going to just take some time to sort that out. I don't think there's a lot of incentives that cities or governments really can do to change that. I think that is going to be something that's going to be a true societal growth and change, and it's going to be long-term, and it's going to be a very deep, substantial change.
And that leads us into, you know, where employers and employees are going to be located, Tara. So this time next year, what do you see happening?
This time next year, I see a number of different things on the horizon. Like Patti, I'm predicting that we are going to see much more remote work being done for many employees. I think a lot of companies are starting to realize they probably don't need all the office space that they're currently renting. They probably don't need all of the equipment that they're currently housing in their offices when employees could be working from home. So that's going to generate a demand for all sorts of remote work policies, remote work agreements, to make sure that you're able to manage the business with people not having their bums in the seats in your office. So that, I think, is going to be a significant change that we see coming up. I'd also like to see employers really taking a look, as I said, and reassessing what policies and contracts they can put into place just to prevent a lot of this uncertainty and a lot of these problems when this eventually does happen at some point in the future. Once again, another issue is I think that employers now really have to start addressing their minds to what their employee complement is going to look like next year. How many employees are we actually going to need? Are we going to be able to bring people back from these layoffs that they're on right now? And start addressing their minds to risk management. So if you don't have a contract with these people, you know, what is termination and severance pay going to look like? Where are we going to land on an offer? Are we going to offer them something a bit more than their employment standards minimum to get a release from them, to prevent any problems down the road? You know, I think now is the time to start doing some of that pre-planning, because you're in a much better position to make decisions about your employees if you know what the costs down the road are going to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to both of you for coming in and talking about SHifT as it applies to both real estate and employment law. I hope that everybody who came in today enjoyed it. If you did, I hope you'll come back. We want to see you. If you know somebody who could benefit from the information that you receive from the experts in the room that are going to help you pivot to success, I hope you'll share out the link and invite them to come in. And of course, if anybody's looking for a second opinion on their employee group benefit program, I hope you might consider giving me a call. So until the time that I can shake your hand in person, I hope you have a fantastic long weekend. Thanks so much for coming out.